if you are somebody who is struggling with your sexual identity, right? Coming to terms with your sexual identity, navigating, understanding yourself and where you belong, and really just kind of how to accept it, then this episode is for you. I will say that this episode is probably going to be a bit of a shorter episode, but it's going to be very precise in the sense of what I want to say and how I want to say it. Because at the end of the day, I think that this is an incredibly important topic, which I know seems opposite to having a shorter episode. Because if it's a super important topic, it should be a much longer episode. But I want to make sure that what I say is to the point, it's very clear, and that what I hope is you will gain better understanding and insight to yourself, the situation, because at the end of the day, we've all been there before. And it's not an easy road. So I want to be able to provide some clarity for you and to shed some light. Before we jump into the episode, let me take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Danny, and I'm a life and self-esteem coach that works with gay and bisexual men in all matters of love and self-esteem. And you are tuning in to season 3 of the Deep Penetration podcast episode. If this is your first time visiting, then welcome. Please make sure you are subscribing. And if you are a returning subscriber, then welcome back. And thank you so much for following me along on this journey and being part of this podcast familia, as the grandmother of Encanto would say. So first and foremost, right, I realize that this is a loaded topic. Every person's experience with accepting their sexuality is going to be different because there isn't a one shoe fits all model. I have worked and spoken to a variety of men from different countries, different generations, political views, and each person had their own personal experience with coming out or accepting their sexuality. And for some of you, accepting your sexuality was more difficult because you were forced to remain closeted due to the views of homosexuality in your country, right? Or your general environment. For others, you were married to a woman for 25 years or 30 years or 50 years and had raised a family before coming out and accepting that you were either gay or bisexual. And for some, you had no issues whatsoever accepting your sexuality because you grew up and were surrounded by a supportive family and group of friends. Every person's journey is different. But the one thing that ties us all together is the fact that our sexual identity makes us different. And allow me to be clear about something. Different is not a bad thing, right? Some of the most successful and brilliant minds in human history were labeled as different. The different I am referring to is distinct or individualistic. If you are like me and you grew up in the United States, then you know the different I am referring to. This may be the case for many of you that grew up outside of the United States as well, but I will draw upon my personal experiences and knowledge of growing up in the United States, because unfortunately I can't relate to other individuals who have grown up in different states or in different countries that have experienced discrimination or stereotyping when it comes to being queer. I am sure that there are similarities. I am sure that the emotional experience is very similar, but in some countries, it is far more dangerous to be open about being queer than it is in others. And because I grew up in the United States, I want to stick to my own personal experience and share that with you. That being said, in my opinion, I think that World War II put a spotlight on the nuclear family, right? And the importance of roles within the household. We're getting a little historical here. And that is not to say that, that hasn't been the case for millennia, right? And I'm not a historian in any way, but based on the research that I have done and the countless articles that I have read pertaining to the impacts of heteronormativity on individuals within the LGBTQ plus community, there was this tangible emphasis on the perfect family, right? Starting in the mid-1940s through the 1960s, specifically in the 1950s, or what they call the baby boom era, right? And this is considered the post-World War II era, where there was this strong desire for a sense of normalcy and stability after the war. So the focus was on the perfect heterosexual family. So cue heteronormativity, right? That's where it comes from. And if you are a baby boomer, a Generation X, a millennial, or honestly, even a Gen Z, you have felt the impacts of the societal pressures if you identify as somebody who is queer. So look, why do I mention these things? I think oftentimes I find that many of us search for answers without truly understanding the depth of the question itself. Yes, some things are not that complicated. I get it. And they can be answered by just taking a quick glance. But to be honest with you, others are far more complex and impact us in ways that we don't always understand. Sometimes we have to look to the past to understand the present and to find a path forward into the future. So, with that in mind, let's break down the steps to accepting your sexuality. Now, I want to be very clear here. I want to kind of preface this or give a disclaimer. These steps are not written in stone, right? This is not like the end all be all, the only way to accepting your sexuality. No, because as I mentioned in the beginning, everybody has their own journey. Everybody has their own process, and everybody is going to approach this in a different way, because coming out, accepting your sexuality, navigating the queer community, and all of those things are a very subjective experience. What I am basing this off of is, number one, my own personal experience and what worked for me throughout this journey. Number two, stories from clients that I have worked with, things that have worked for them, things that I have recommended and they have tried and have worked as well. Because at the end of the day, I want you to be able to have an easier time than I did. Let's put it that way. I think that's the point of this all. I think that the point of what I do and why I do it is to try to support and try to help and try to, help you avoid some of the mistakes that I made. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't make mistakes, because I think mistakes are incredibly important. I think they help you grow and all of those things. But if I can make the process a little bit easier for you, then I'm super happy to do that. So, number one, knowledge, right? Understanding our roots as a community is super important. I understand that not everyone feels connected to the LGBTQ plus community, and that's okay, right? Regardless of your connection to the community, understanding personal stories of individuals within the community that paved the way for us to have the freedoms that we do can really inspire you to embrace your sexuality and help you to not feel so alone. And some of the books that I've recommended to clients and that I would recommend to you now, if you have not heard of them, if you've maybe purchased them and never really read them and they're just kind of sitting on your bookshelf, I would recommend grabbing that shit off the bookshelf and taking a little gander. The first one is Stonewall, The Riots That Sparked the Gay Revolution, and that one's going to be by David Carter. The second one is The Velvet Rage by Alan Downs. And the third one is by The Hidden Culture, History, and Science of Bisexuality by Julia Shaw. Now, Velvet Rage, I want to talk about this for a second. I actually, and honestly talking about history here, the reality is and the truth is, I recently started to really dive into queer history, right? And understanding our roots and where it comes from and all of those things. Because growing up, I always felt like I was searching for knowledge and understanding and all of those things, and I was never really able to find it. I don't want to call out the bookstore that I'm thinking of because I don't want to get sued. But there is a bookstore that starts with a B and ends with Nobles that I used to go to, and they have stories about they have queer-friendly books. Let's put it that way, right? They are not anti-LGBTQ plus in any way whatsoever, but the section is so small, right? And it was hard for me to find what I was looking for when I needed it the most. And again, no fault to them whatsoever, because at least they had a section, which I'm very grateful for. That's actually where I picked up a couple of books the other day. But we're lacking, y'all. And we need more education. We need more resources. We need more information, because if we don't, that's where we start to see the effects of searching for that in places like the dark web and Google searches and all of that stuff. A lot of our youth is being educated through these channels. And I think personally for me, I would say that that's creating a lot of issues with how we navigate relationships and how we view ourselves and self-esteem and all of that stuff. Because while heterosexual kids have sex education and all of that stuff in schools, we do not. So where do we learn that information? Like I said, places like the internet, which there is a plethora of information that is great, and there is a lot of information that is not so great. So having some of these healthy references and books and all of that stuff is really important. Now, I want to go back to the Velvet Rage because I totally just fucking segued off. I don't know why my brain, I literally thought of myself like on a segue, like going in the opposite of direction of where I wanted to go. But Velvet Rage, incredible book. If you have never read the book, if you've never heard of it, go and get it. I think Alan Downs is a genius. I think his ability to be so vulnerable and so open about the things that he talks about and his experiences and his client stories really touched me. It's actually one of the few books that have made me cry in a really, really long time. So go get it. I would love to have Alan Downs on one of my podcast episodes one day. Dream, maybe that'll happen. Putting it out in the environment or the atmosphere for that to happen. But regardless, go get the book. Okay, so the second thing here is embracing self-discovery, right? And I completely understand how scary it is to begin exploring your sexuality, especially if you have been avoiding it for a long time. Here is what you can potentially expect if you continue to avoid it. The first one is anxiety around conversations pertaining to your sexuality. The other one is excitement, fear, and anxiety when it comes to your first physical experience. The other one is confusion around self-identification. I would say another one is relief from the release of the past perceptions that have kept you stuck. And if it's something that you are struggling with, right, self-identifying or releasing this kind of self-perception of who you should be, I would highly recommend looking at the Kinsey scale and answering the questions associated to the sexuality chart. Some would argue that categorizing yourself is not healthy, but in my experience, having a starting point is always best, right? And the Kinsey scale will give you a better idea as to where you fall on the sexuality spectrum. And the beautiful thing is, it can change, right? It doesn't have to remain the same. So make sure you are answering those questions truthfully. I did it later in life as an adult. I wish I had known about the Kinsey scale when I was younger, because I think it would have really helped me to navigate life a little bit better and understand myself a little bit better. I'm somebody, if you do not know, who identifies as bisexual. I don't want to say my entire life, because I don't think that like when I came out of the wound, I was like, why I'm bisexual. But as I started to grow, and go into puberty and little rages of hormones and horniness and all that stuff, I was like, oh yeah, I like both men and women. And when I did the Kinsey scale, I actually was dead in the middle. So that was some validation and confirmation. The third one here is sexual exploration, right? This is one, if not the most important part of the self-acceptance journey, in my opinion, right? So it's one thing to have a theory, and it's another to test that theory. So coming to terms with the fact that you might not be straight is a hurdle in and of itself, but experiencing intimacy with some of the same or different sex. Well, actually, how do I want to say that? That sounds really weird. Having experiences with people of the same sex or people of a different sex is going to be part of that journey in figuring yourself out. I want to be clear here, right? These parts of your journey, it doesn't mean that you have to sleep with everybody, right? It doesn't mean that you have to like go out and just like whore it up. You don't need to do that. I mean, if you want to do that, that's fine. No judgment. You do you. I definitely went through that phase. So sheep calling the kettle black. Is that how it goes? Is that the right term? George, is that the right term? The pot calling the kettle black, the sheep calling the kettle black. The hell? I don't know what that's all about. Just ignore me. No, wait, don't ignore me, because then that means you're not going to listen to this episode. Ignore what I just said. Jesus Christ. Or not, if you're not religious. God. Anyways, so going back to what I was saying, you don't have to sleep with every single person, right? That's not something that you have to do. And I will warn you, when you first come out and when you first start to experience your sexuality, there will be a lot of people who try to pressure you into doing that. You don't need to do that. There is this common misconception that a hookup requires you to sleep with countless people. But to be frank, it's almost a game in the queer community to see how many people you can sleep with. And for some, it's simply because you enjoy sex, right? But for a majority, I have come to find that it's rooted in insecurity and the need for external validation. I'm saying this fully aware of the fact that I myself slept with many men during a period of time that I was seeking that validation and that belonging. So be intentional. Reflect on your core values before putting yourself out there, and be firm on your boundaries. Your fear of hurting other people's feelings will only result in you hurting your own far worse. You can explore your desires, you can explore your kinks, and all of that stuff with someone you are comfortable with, not with a ton of people. But again, if that's something that you want to do, that is totally up to you. There's no judgment on my end. It's just everybody has a different approach. Fourth thing here is drowning out the noise. It is human nature to seek belonging. Okay. And we crave community on a deep and just ancestral level. And therefore, when you begin to accept your sexuality, you will lose and gain social circles. in the gaining of new circles, you will want to fit in, which puts you in a vulnerable position. Do you go with the crowd or do you swim against the tide? Do you accept less than favorable behavior for a sense of belonging? Do you unearth the toxic side of your personality just so you can keep up with the banter and the jokes and the exchanges and all of that stuff? Maybe, but here's the thing. This is not the case with every group that you meet, right? With every person that you meet, but you will come across them. Let me be clear. You will come across them, especially in the queer community. And I know it may seem like I'm talking poorly about the LGBTQ plus community, but I promise you I am not. There are so many beautiful nuances to our community, but I wouldn't be completely honest if I pretended like it was all rainbows and butterflies and all that stuff, right? I mean, what community is? There are facets of the heterosexual community that have their issues as well. It's not just a queer issue, but if you are going to be navigating the queer community and trying to find where you belong and a sense of self and all of those things, it's good to have these things in mind. My point in all of this is don't lose who you are just to fit a stereotype. Sexuality is on a spectrum, and there will always be people who try to box you in, even in the LGBTQ plus community, right? So if something feels off, question it. If something triggers you, reflect on it. If the noise gets too loud, just drown it out. I hope you guys found this episode to be helpful, insightful, or whatever you want it to be, right? We're going to talk about a lot of stuff this season, just like every other season, but I wanted to be a lot more direct in my approach this season and cover topics that I think are maybe a little bit more, or a little heavier and aren't talked about that frequently in the queer community because maybe we are afraid to talk about it. But that's what this is all about, right? So I hope you stick around for the next episode. I hope you stick around for the entirety of the season. If you were enjoying the content so far, the episode so far, make sure you are subscribing and make sure that you're checking out all my other social media platforms as well. If you'd like to book a coaching session, if you'd like to have a conversation, I will provide all the information for that in the details of this episode, but you can also find all that information on my other social media platforms like my TikTok and my Instagram and all that good stuff. All right. I hope you guys are having an amazing day. I hope you find that to be helpful, and I'll see you in the next episode.